Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I am your host, Vikas Swarup. The President of the European Commission, Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, visited New Delhi on April 24-25. This was her first visit to India as the President of the European Commission, and it provides us the perfect opportunity for an in-depth review of India's partnership with the European Union. The EU is an important pole of the multipolar order because of its sheer scale. It represents a combined population of 500 million people, has a combined GDP of $20 trillion, making it the world's second largest economy, and accounts for 16.5% of global imports and exports, making it the world's largest trading bloc. The EU grew out of a desire to integrate Europe as an antidote to the extreme nationalism that had caused centuries of warfare among European countries, culminating in World War II, which decimated much of the continent. To this end, the leaders of 6 countries, Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany, signed the Treaty of Paris in 1951, placing their coal and steel production in a common market, which led to the founding of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1952. The Common Assembly of the Community later became the European Parliament. In 1957, the 6 countries signed the Treaty of Rome, which created the European Economic Community and established a customs union. In 1985, the Schengen Agreement paved the way for the creation of open borders without passport controls between most member states. The end of the Cold War provided impetus for greater integration, leading to the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, which formally established the European Union and paved the way for a monetary union and the creation of a single European currency, the euro, which was introduced on the 1st of January 1999. European citizenship was also created, allowing citizens to reside in and move freely between member states, and a common foreign and security policy was established. The EU undertook a robust expansion in the early 21st century, giving membership to several former communist countries of Eastern and Central Europe, such as Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Even though Britain withdrew from the EU in 2020, it still has 27 members and commands global influence. India's own relationship with the EU dates back to 1962, when India became one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the European Economic Community. The relationship focused initially on trade and economic cooperation, but later expanded through a cooperation agreement signed in 1994, which broad-based the relationship to include ministerial meetings and a political dialogue. The first summit-level engagement between India and the EU took place in Lisbon in June 2000 and has now become a regular feature, with 15 summits having been held since then. An unprecedented India-EU leaders meeting was held on the 8th of May 2021 in Porto, Portugal, with the participation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi virtually, leaders of all the 27 EU member states, as well as the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Today, our strategic partnership with the EU encompasses political and security issues, trade and investment, climate change and clean energy, sustainable urbanization and environment, health, agriculture and food security, information and communications technology, research and innovation, space and nuclear, education and culture. The EU is India's largest trading partner for goods, with trade of Euro 88.1 billion in 2021, an increase of 35% over 2020, and services trade of around Euro 35 billion in 2020. The EU's share in foreign investment inflows to India more than doubled from 8% to 18% in the last decade, making the EU India's largest source of FDI. During April 2000 to September 2020, FDI inflows from the EU to India totaled US dollars 86.82 billion. Indian investments in the EU are also estimated at around 50 billion euros. Both sides have launched an ambitious and comprehensive connectivity partnership. They are enhancing bilateral cooperation on digital and emerging technologies such as 5G, AI, quantum and high-performance computing. they have announced a resumption of negotiations for balanced and comprehensive free trade and investment agreements, and also an agreement on geographical indications. There will be dedicated dialogues on WTO issues, regulatory cooperation, market access issues, and supply chain resilience. The EU has also unveiled its own strategy on the Indo-Pacific to address common challenges and uphold an open and rules-based regional security architecture. So why is the India-EU partnership important? And why does the European Union matter to the world? To answer these questions, I am joined by two leading experts. Ambassador Manjeev Puri is a former diplomat who has served as India's ambassador to Nepal, the European Union, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Dr. Garima Mohan is based in Berlin and is a fellow in the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund. Her research focuses on Europe-India ties, EU foreign policy in Asia, and security in the Indo-Pacific. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Puri. How important is the role of the EU Commission within the EU?
Vikas, thank you very much. That, I think, is one of the more important questions. The European Commission is the kern. It's the central core of running the European Union as such. Therefore, the President of the Commission, if I may say so, is like the Prime Minister of Europe. The President of the European Council chairs the meetings. A country provides 6 monthly presidency there. But it is the Commission which is the heart and soul, the Secretariat which has the powers, the abilities, etc. and therefore critically important.
So this leads me to my next question. What is the significance of the visit of the President of the European Commission to India at this point in time?
Vikas, in my opinion, it was a particularly well-timed visit, both in terms of India and the EU, and the fact that it was Ursula von der Leyen. She is the President of the European Commission. She would have anyway come to India for the next India-EU summit, but coming by herself, being invited as the chief guest of the Raisina Dialogue, which is India's platform for sharing its perspectives on global issues, was particularly important. Secondly, we can't forget what is happening in Europe, the Ukraine, Russia, and the entire imbroglio. And therefore, in India and in the world, there is a great deal of consternation as to what it means for Europe. Is there a wither EU? Is there a change in the global order? And therefore, her presence, her ideas are important. Thirdly, there is COVID. We are still coming out of COVID. But what exactly does COVID mean? It's a code word for the rise of China, a hegemonistic rise of China. And are we seeing the Europeans, in some senses, trying to figure out that they need to distance themselves a little bit from the far better and much more cozier relationship that they had? And finally, if I may say, pointing to the positive, the Indo-Pacific. For us, of critical importance, of course for Europe, some distance away. And all these factors put together made this visit not only important in terms of the personnel, but also important in terms of the timing. Very, very important for India, and I dare say for the world itself.
Dr. Mohan, Ambassador Puri just mentioned the Indo-Pacific strategy of the EU. How important is that strategy, and how wide-ranging and effective it can be?
So the strategy is very important for the European Union because, as Ambassador Puri mentioned, the delegation that came from Europe right now is sizable. It's unprecedented for the Raisina Dialogue. And having this delegation in the middle of the crisis with Russia, Europe is dealing with war at its footsteps. The fact that they chose to come to India shows just how important the Indo-Pacific is for the European Union. The strategy is very wide-ranging. It covers partnerships, particularly with countries like India, Japan, Australia, and Southeast Asia. They really want to diversify away from China. So they're looking at it in all ways, through economics, through security, whether it is maritime security, other things, through strengthening institutions in the region, and working. They're even interested in, working and cooperating with organizations or institutions like the Quad, which will be difficult, but I find it really interesting and unprecedented in many ways to hear those conversations in Berlin and Brussels and Paris indeed, of how to really integrate and work more and more with this region. So I think it is a pretty wide-ranging strategy, and they're showing up, they're delivering. They're in India right now, they'll go to the Shangri-La Dialogue next. So I think showing up is the first step.
Absolutely. Now, Ambassador Puri, the President of the EU Commission said that her visit to India is mainly to advance the partnership with India in three key areas: trade, technology, and security. Why did she choose these three key areas?
Vikas, let me again make the point to you. She said security for obvious reasons. Look what is happening between Russia and Ukraine and how it's affecting them. Possible changes in the global order. Then is the question of encompassing the Indo-Pacific, the rise of China, a hegemonistic rise of China, India's own interests in the neighborhood, including Afghanistan, and therefore making this point in one go. But in my opinion, and I have had the opportunity of serving India with the European Union in Brussels, the key remains economics. And the other two things that you mentioned, technology, trade, they're all one thing, economics. The European Union is India's largest partner, but one that we both sides take for granted. We say, oh, well, they are there, but they are a diminishing power. We have all kinds of reasons for it. We are also besotted with the idea of European countries, little realizing that the countries have actually ceded power, and it's the Commission and the European Union which really cause the shots. On their side, let me make this point to you. No matter how important we think we are, and we are going to become more important, becoming the largest country in the world in 2027, one of the 5 largest economies in the world, no matter each of this, they have options. Almost as large as us is ASEAN. There are other countries in the world, so they have options. We need to do the push. They, of course, also now are pushed in this direction as a result of COVID, the rise of China, etc. But I think this is an idea and time for us to do it. And therefore, I appreciate the invitation to the President of the European Commission and her taking up the invitation.
Dr. Mohan, as you said, it was significant that Ms. Ursula von der Leyen came to India at a time when Europe is facing its biggest ground war since the Second World War. And in her speech at the Raisina Dialogue, she said that the war in Ukraine is a defining moment for European security. Do you agree?
Absolutely. It is a wake-up call for Europeans. They were living in almost a postmodern world where conflict does not exist anymore. The European Union was created to overcome the conflicts between countries, and the success of the Union made them, dare I say, a little complacent. In the Indo-Pacific, we've seen borders being contested, we've seen spheres of influence being established. But in the European Union, because of the Union, they were living in relative peace and security for a long time. So this has really shaken the Union to its core, and we've seen some dramatic changes. We saw the important speech by German Chancellor Scholz, where he said that he's reversing, historical policy, and Germany will focus on security and its military again, like in a way that it has not done in the past.
They've gone from helmets to bullets.
Yes, I mean, they're thinking tanks now. So let's see if those deliveries happen. But even with the EU, it started with delivering defense equipment and heavy arms to Ukraine. That is unprecedented. So we are seeing unprecedented changes in the European Union. And the aim of President von der Leyen was to create a geopolitical commission. She tried her best, but I think circumstances have forced her and the EU to be a bit more geopolitical.
Now, Ambassador Puri, let's turn the focus to a little bit on the trade and investment side. Negotiations between India and the EU on a broad-based trade and investment agreement started in 2007, but as you know, they were put on hold in 2014 following differences over sensitive non-trade issues such as labor standards and environment. Now negotiations are resuming for 2 separate standalone agreements. How hopeful are you of concluding these agreements this time?
Because I don't know about hope, but I believe it is in India's interest, and I dare say in the European interest, to conclude these agreements. Let me take you back to what you said when we started this program. They are our largest investors. And we used to have bilateral investment protection agreements with several European countries. We abrogated them. There's no investment treaty as yet. This is a need of the hour. When we want to attract FDI, we want to give a push to Atmanirbhar Bharat. This is your time and tested partner. Shouldn't you lay out the infrastructural and the institutional arrangements to give it a push? This is one side. Let's look at trade. I know that there are a lot of sensitive issues. We all have our sensitivities. But let us understand that no economy is really going to get a severe boost to its aggregate size if it remains protectionist. And we have always benefited with European cooperation. How are we going to raise our technological abilities? You have to do an opening up. That, in my opinion, will give an truly significant boost to Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Dr. Mohan, turning back to the war in Ukraine. Now, Russian energy giant Gazprom has just told Poland and Bulgaria that it's going to stop gas supplies to them unless they pay Russians in rubles, which of course they have refused. So how do you see the impact of the war in Ukraine on European energy security?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and I think one that European countries are grappling with as well. Poland said that it was ready to diversify away from Russian gas anyway, but it is really made urgent the question of diversifying its energy supplies. But interestingly, it's also leading Europeans to question how much can they rely on countries like China. So they will also be talking a little bit more about how to diversify, not just in terms of energy, but also in critical supplies, because the experience they had with China during COVID also made them understand that they need to be, in a way, self-reliant, as we say, in certain critical areas. Energy is, of course, one of them. Energy dependencies cannot be solved overnight, so this will be a long-term question for the European Union. But as they deliberate this question, they will think not just of Russia, but also China.
That's a very important point. Now, Ambassador Puri, energy security is also very important for India. And the EU is diversifying, as you know, away from fossil fuels. It is investing heavily in clean, renewable energy. It has announced a target of net zero emissions by 2050. How is the India-EU partnership evolving in areas such as solar and green hydrogen?
Well, the European Union has been the leader in these areas, and certainly big partners for us. After all, the International Solar Alliance was put together by India and France, and Ursula von der Leyen went to their secretariat here on the 24th of April. So certainly we were counting on their being strong partners in that, in not just solar, not just wind, but also green hydrogen, which we want to give a very big push to. But you know, talking about what could happen in Europe as a result of the Russian imbroglio, I am not sure if necessarily all the things, at least in the short run, will go in that direction. The Europeans opened their taxonomy recently, and they said yes to ideas of even nuclear, which otherwise were completely anathema. Will this result in a newer kind of nuclear technologies? I hope so, at least for the sake of India. So we have to look at this. But I am very convinced in one thing. For India to go green, to get the necessary monies as well as the technologies, there is absolutely no doubt the Europeans are our natural partners, and we should both leverage this partnership for each other's and global benefit.
Dr. Mohan, many experts say that the EU's foreign and defense policy remains weak and underdeveloped in comparison to the other European projects such as the monetary union. Do you agree with this assessment?
I don't agree with this assessment, and I'll give you two answers for this. First, let's talk about foreign policy. Now, while foreign policy countries make their own foreign policies, Brussels has had a particular competency in doing foreign policy, especially with Asia and China. Let me tell you, I'm sure you've all heard of the European Union characterizing China as a partner, competitor, rival. Yes. Where did this framing come from? It was pushed through Brussels. It was not pushed through member states. Member states were too dependent on their relations with China. This came from Brussels. So a lot of strategic thinking is coming from the EU, particularly also on India, because everybody knows about this formulation for China. But not a lot of people know that the EU also released a new strategy for India at the same time in 2018, where it said that it needs to make the partnership more geopolitical, that India is a key pillar in a multipolar Asia and Indo-Pacific. So a lot of the impetus is coming from the EU and Brussels, and I think we don't appreciate that enough in New Delhi. When it comes to security, of course, the EU does not have its navy or its army, but the definition of security has broadened. You have cyber security, you have security of supply chains, you have security of the seas, and you have climate-related security challenges. And in all of these, the EU plays a key role. It has the money, it has the resources, it has the partnerships in the world. So I think we need to think about these things more broadly. And EU and India just signed during this visit, they've just agreed to create a Trade and Technology Council.
Yes.
Now this council is going to be talking about exactly these questions, questions that are strategic and have implications on security, whether it is 5G, whether it is investments, trade, standards, and a lot of China-related questions are going to be covered in this council. So I think it would aid our policy if we don't just look at EU and say, well, it's not a foreign policy actor. It is, and perhaps in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine, it would assume a greater role.
Ambassador Puri, we are seeing the EU setting global norms on issues such as clean fuel, 5G, data privacy, etc. How important is the EU as a norm-setting body for the world, and how can India partner with the EU in this important area?
Well, as far as India is concerned, EU is the only global norm-setting body. Everything that we do in India comes from Europe. The car that you and I drive, we love to have Bharat 6. Yes, what is that? Correct. That is the European 6 level. So, you know, the EU is the world champion on setting norms. Main reason being the United States is quite lax on setting them. We don't know what happens in China. I don't know what happens in Japan. Nobody really cares. The EU is the principal norm setter. And this is even true on what kind of mangoes you can export, what kind of pharmaceuticals, what kind of rice you can do, what pesticides you can put in it. We have no choice but to collaborate with them, and I'll tell you the reason. Because otherwise, they are just going to do what they are doing. They're a $20 trillion economy. You are at 2.5. You are not going to be able to call the shots. In fact, you need to start adjusting. And if you work with them inside the tent, you might get them to accept things which are good to you. So it's absolutely inevitable. It should be done.
Dr. Mohan, in recent years, we have seen the emergence of Euroscepticism as a popular movement, which even led to the exit of Britain from the European Union. What is fueling this Euroscepticism, and how do you see this impacting the EU?
Yeah, that's an important question, and I think with the case of Brexit, but also a couple of other movements, we saw people not being completely satisfied with the EU being seen as an unelected body, imposing rules and regulations. The regulatory aspects, they sort of bother the lay person in your day-to-day life, and you know that you have to pay certain taxes or follow certain rules. It's a bit more cumbersome. But I have to say that the Eurosceptic movement has not really taken off in many other parts. We just saw a French election, yes, where President Macron, who's a staunch supporter of the Union, won. In other elections as well, except for Hungary, there has not been a good result for populist movements. But I have a feeling that with the war in Ukraine, there is a resounding show of unity behind the EU. The EU's efforts in dealing with the crisis are being appreciated. And there's also a sense of worry among other European countries of we need collective security and therefore we need the EU. And I found it very interesting that in popular opinion polls, the EU has gone up. For countries like Sweden and Finland, they are now considering joining NATO. So again, there is an impulse towards collective security, being together, rather than going their separate ways, because these are small countries overall, and I think they're better off being in a union than being alone. So I think the Euroscepticism has receded. Let's see what long-term impact the war in Ukraine has.
Ambassador Puri, let's now turn the focus to China-EU ties. Now, EU-China daily trade is worth 2 million euros. But the recent summit between China and the EU on the 1st of April does not appear to have gone off very well, with both sides disagreeing on Ukraine, the EU demanding that China lift sanctions it had imposed on members of the European Parliament, address global concerns on human and labor rights, especially in Xinjiang, and improve access and conditions for EU companies in its market. The EU-China Investment Treaty, which was signed with great fanfare, also does not appear to have made much headway. How do you see the future partnership evolving between the European Union and China, particularly post-Ukraine?
You know, the European countries, not just the European Union, identified China as a major place for economic activity. Look at the Germans, which is really the powerhouse of the European Union. Look at their trade with China. And the Chinese benefited equally. They've then started making inroads into Europe. How this will pan out in the future, I think will depend a lot in terms of what will happen in terms of the US-China relationship. I think that's something which is very critical, and one shouldn't simply take it to be a case of huge contestation or competitiveness. In fact, if I remember, Secretary Blinken had said that, there are also large areas of collaboration. So we have to look at this particular thing. Look, there are certain advantages. Today, EU-China trade is in the region of about 500 billion euros. Look at our figures. Nowhere in that comparison. Are we in a position to find an answer? No. Aren't the Chinese the suppliers of almost everything that the Europeans want, that the United States want? So we'll have to see how all of this works out. This Europe-Russia, Ukraine-Russia imbroglio is a pretty critical thing. But one thing we must understand, the people in the West, including in Western Europe, are now no longer looking at China purely as a wonderful, benign source of making more money. They are happy making the money, but they are also asking the question. And for that, I must say, it is COVID, because it brought it home to you in your family, inside in your little town that you lived in. You saw a death and you asked a question, why did it happen? I don't think I need to say the rest of it.
Dr. Mohan, your take on the future of EU-China partnership?
The EU-China partnership has changed tremendously over the last few years, and as Ambassador Puri mentioned, for the negative, COVID was a significant downturn. President von der Leyen in her address to the Raisina dialogue mentioned the China-Russia no-limits partnership. So Europeans are increasingly looking at China through the same lens as they used to, or are still looking at Russia. In the past, this was a clear issue between India and Europe and other countries in Europe as well, where countries in the Indo-Pacific were clearly concerned about China's behavior, whereas Europe was not. That is now changing because of this no-limits partnership. Germany used to be a particularly stubborn country, refusing to change its China policy under Chancellor Merkel. Under Chancellor Scholz, his first visit abroad to Asia would be in Tokyo. Second would be Prime Minister Modi going to Germany. And China is not even on the list. In the past, it was always Germany-China ties that gained priority. So slowly but steadily, we are seeing a shift. A shift in Germany would mean a massive shift overall. Central Eastern European countries are already in a really, delicate situation. Countries like Lithuania have exited the 17+1. Lithuanian Foreign Minister at the Raisina also mentioned economic coercion by China. And they see it as a clear threat. So a lot of the pockets of Europe that used to be having good ties with China and were friendly with China and were looking at economic opportunities are also realizing the political costs and the economic costs of this partnership. So I think we see a massive change in how Europe is dealing with China, and this will continue unless China changes the way it operates as an international actor.
Well, thank you both for sharing your fantastic thoughts with us. As India and the EU celebrate the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations, it is clear that this relationship is more important than ever and will continue to uphold a rules-based international order in a challenging global landscape. That's all in this edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. This is Vikas Swarup wishing you good night and goodbye.